this life. You, in this incarnation, part of your sacred story is that you were very awake and aware of other lifetimes as early as 3 years old, right? So you came pretty tuned in. Can you share your sacred story, from your childhood with our listeners this evening, please?
Absolutely. So yeah, it was it was an interesting start on a life. So I was about 3 years old, and of course, at 3 you're really learning to communicate and to talk, to get your ideas across. And of course, what I know now, what I didn't know at 3, was that part of my soul path is to be a communicator. And so as a 3-year-old, I was very frustrated. Communication was not going so well. And I had just that sort of epiphany, that flash. My memory literally is like looking at my little baby hands and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm trapped in a body. And I just was like, no, I want to go back. What was I doing? What am I thinking, right? And so it was a little bit of a shock for me as a small child. And I know I used to tell my mother I wanted to go home, and my poor mom would be like, but you are home, honey, So it was kind of an interesting start, but I was really very blessed because when I was about 12, we moved to California from Chicago, and it was the 60s and the 70s in California, and there was a lot of information coming through. So again, when we think about our soul path and why we choose our families and, places and situations, we really write so much of this into our sacred story. We make a plan before we come in, and they're not always easy, but there is a purpose in there. So this is one of the things I love about the Akashic Records, is discovering what were we thinking before we entered a body? Why did we plan this? So, my realizations after I started working in the records, part of the reason I picked my family is they were part Christian, part Jewish, very kind of scientific, very open, and they love California. It all worked well for me. So there's, kind of this non-denominational, non-real, religious, but kind of spiritual family. And so growing up in California, it was also the beginning of really the new age, of the age of Aquarius, then in the 60s. And there was lots of writing that was coming through. So I literally started minoring in philosophy. So I started reading books really in high school at, 13, 14 years old. I started reading all of the Eastern wisdom that was coming to the West, and then all sorts of esoteric books like Journeys Out of the Body, which was one of my favorites by Robert Monroe, learning how to astral travel, and so just lots of Carlos Castaneda, just lots of amazing things. So the blessing for me was that I realized I wasn't really crazy, that I actually remembered all sorts of things, past lives, ancient wisdom. And so reading these books was a great confirmation for me. So as I read all of this information, I was like, oh, good, other people think the way I think. They believe the same thing I believe, right? So so it was an interesting start. It was kind of a fast, jump start. So, yeah, sometimes, and then I had a kind of a tragic upending. So it's interesting, we really choose all sorts of different paths. I always remind myself, and of course my students and clients, that it really is a path, a journey, not a destination. Somewhere in my 20s, both of my best friends died, and I decided I didn't care. I wasn't doing my spiritual work anymore. I was really over it, even though I was so awake to say, I know I'm on a spiritual path. I know I'm supposed to do something, and I just said, forget it. I'm done. I'm over it. I was about 18, 19 years old. So I took a good 15-year hiatus there and and had some fun. But our true soul calling really, keeps pulling us back. Hopefully we hear that calling and we come back. And I did. It wasn't, like I always say, that it had its own challenges, but kind of blessed to find my way back and find myself here today and really be able to see that road, see the path, and know in hindsight that it was just perfect, that my crazy 15-year hiatus was just perfect. I learned tons of stuff. I learned compassion and forgiveness and acceptance, and I traveled all over the world. I love to travel. And so I enjoy those human aspects as well as the spiritual aspects. So spending hours at a time in the records, writing books, working with clients, teaching classes, and traveling. So